Hi, I'm Rick Dior, and that crazy piece of music was a solo called Tony's Way from Rich Thompson's Jazz Solos Volume Number 1. So this is part of a series I'm doing of solos that I use in my teaching. Each one of these solos is dedicated to a specific great jazz drummer. So this lesson is all about Tony Williams, the great Tony Williams. So Tony Williams started his career basically his career with Miles Davis, although he was playing with Jackie McLean when he was 16, and Miles saw him and said, I want that guy in my band. And before that, the famous Miles Davis Quintet featured Philly Joe Jones. So as you can imagine, having the young Tony Williams in there was a complete change of pace. Although at that time, Tony played a little bit more like, Max Roach, Jimmy Cobb, Philly Joe, a little more of that style. As he matured and found his own footing, he developed a completely individual way of playing jazz drums that really changed the world of jazz drumming. And if you think about a family tree of drummers, you might have Papa Joe Jones in the beginning of the bebop era, branching out into Kenny Clarke, Max Roach, Art Blakey, and then those guys branched out into Roy Haynes, although he was there for everything. He's basically from the beginning all the way until now. He's still with us. And Elvin branched out this way. Tony branched out that way. Roy Haynes just kept moving up straight. So you have this big tree of drummers, and each one of them is diverging on their own path. And all those, let's say, post-bop drummers influenced all of the modern drummers you hear today in some way. Even if they don't know it, they're playing some of these drummers' licks and feels and all that. So Tony was a big one. He's one of those big PowerPoints in your PowerPoint music presentation. He's one of the big ones. So you need to study him and learn as much about him as you can. Records that I'd recommend would be some early Miles records, like Four and More. We've talked about that record before here on my channel. But later ones, definitely, like Nefertiti, ESP. Those later Miles Davis records are just unbelievable. They really changed the way jazz was sounding. So you need to really, really study those records and his playing. Now, on those records, Tony's playing is somewhat sparse. Certain pieces, like Nefertiti, he didn't play as dense as someone like Elvin or Roy Haynes and those guys. It was very spacious. So you need to study that. But Tony, later on, after the Miles Davis Quintet, after he left them, he started diving into and inventing what we called jazz fusion in those days. So you had Tony Williams records like Emergency and all these records. And then you had like the Mahavishnu Orchestra, Jean-Luc Ponty, a lot of these different drummers like Alphonse Mouzon, Billy Cobham. But if Tony really started that whole thing, if you really go back and research it. And then he started playing more of an almost rock style, where he would play backbeat. He started playing the hi-hat on all four notes like that, so it would sound like this. So he really, really started hitting really heavy, if you watch it. And I got to see him live a few times in that kind of configuration. It was pretty breathtaking, really. Now, I was also fortunate enough to see Tony Williams play live later on in the 80s, many times, actually. I saw him at every opportunity. And once I saw him at the Village Vanguard with Ron Carter and Herbie Hancock. I went that whole weekend, I think almost every show. And I sat in back of Herbie. There was this booth in the Vanguard that was right back of the piano. You could sit in back of Herbie. So I wanted to see how he was voicing his chords, because I do play some piano, not in public, but I do. And then the other shows I'd sit, as close as possible. And boy, Tony just in that little club, the Vanguard, he's just playing really, really powerful, really loud. It's just great to see him up close. But the other times I saw him was from a distance. So seeing him up close is a lot different from seeing him at a distance. You really hear a lot of little stuff he does, a lot of little stuff he does with his left hand. He has these little explosions that he does. He'll be playing. lots of big cymbal sounds, big bass drum, that great canary yellow set he had, that Gretsch set that he played on. So it's just a sound. He used these blacked out heads. They were tuned really high. And he sat really high, and he kind of danced on the drums. The pedals were like this, very unorthodox. And his hand technique was really interesting, too. He had great technique, amazing singles. He was very fond of doing singles on the tom. Sometimes he did whole solos where he did singles around the drums. Just great stuff. So this solo explores a lot of his soloing and timekeeping ideas. So let's start dissecting this thing. In the beginning, you have this little figure here. I'll do it slowly. So that's sort of halftime. Now when it's fast, it sounds completely different. It straightens out. So. Now, if you play your hi-hat on all four like that, that open is there for the taking. So you could just reach over and play it on the ands like this. So that is one benefit of doing the hi-hat on all four. And he was really the first guy to do that. And that goes throughout this whole solo. Now at bar 9, he does this figure, and this is called a hemiola, which is an implied signature, time signature within another. In this case, it's 3/4 within 4/4. I'll play that for you with the metronome. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you hear how you could think 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, that dotted quarter almost, all right? So he did that all the time, and in this solo, there's several places that is played. So at bar 26, we get to this kind of cymbal thing that happens throughout the solo in different variations. And again, this is another Tonyism where he would play. When it's fast, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now after that, we get a little quieter, and we play this thing at 36, which is actually from the 4 More 7 Steps to Heaven, that little lick. So if you listen to that, he plays some drum fills like that. And also on Nefertiti and ESP, he does a lot of that. That kind of linear playing, you know, where you're just playing one note at a time on a certain part of the kit. Then we get to this thing at 44, which is probably the most difficult part of the solo to play. This is a big hemiola, the third bar of 44. So that sounds like this. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that is extremely difficult coordination-wise to play, especially with that hi-hat on all four. Finally, we get to bar 59. Bar 54 is kind of another variation. I should play that for you. Another variation of that cymbal stuff. We'll do that. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's how that works. It's pretty easy. It's just alternating, and every crash you play, you use the bass drum to support it. Now, one thing I should say is, as I'm doing those crashes, I am using the shaft of the stick on the cymbals, like this. So if you play traditional, you're going to have to do lot. He had a great bass drum foot, very powerful, very strong. Finally, we get to this thing at 59, which is extremely tricky. The way he wrote it, there's 3 notes on the bass drum in a row, and then you do this flam between the floor tom and the snare drum. So that sounds like this. I'll do it slower. It's extremely physically taxing. And the last part, 63, sounds like this. So it ends in an epic sort of Tony Williams style. You know, the thing about him, he was so musical. He could be incredibly powerful, but incredibly subtle at the same time. And just those explosions were so exciting, especially behind a soloist. It's, if I was a horn player, I would have loved to play with Tony Williams because his sound was so open. And he just played the right things in the right places. He waited, he listened. So he would never step on the soloist. He would basically do a call and response or inspire them to play harder. So that's one thing that I really, really love about his playing. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned something from it. You got to listen to a lot of Tony Williams if you want to be a modern jazz drummer. So we'll play a little and we'll call it a day. 1, 2, 1, 2.